Welcome back to Twists of Love and Fate, my amazing community of storytellers and truth seekers. If you're joining us for the first time today, I'm so glad you found your way here. This channel is dedicated to sharing real stories that not only captivate, but also teach us valuable lessons about life, love, and the unexpected turns our journeys can take. To my loyal viewers who've been with me through countless narratives of triumph and heartbreak, thank you for your continued support. Your comments and insights make this community special, and I'm constantly inspired by how deeply you connect with these stories. And to our newcomers, you've joined a family that values authenticity and growth through others' experiences. Today's story struck me particularly hard. It's about wealth, secrets, and the devastating cost of living behind a mask. I promise you'll want to stay until the end because the transformation this woman undergoes is nothing short of extraordinary. Her journey from opulence to destitution and then to something far more meaningful contains wisdom we can all benefit from. So settle in, perhaps grab something to drink, and prepare yourself for a tale that might just change how you think about success, honesty, and what truly matters in life. I came across Isabel's story during a charity fundraiser last month. I was speaking with a volunteer who works at a community center in the downtown area. As we discussed the various paths that lead people to need assistance, she mentioned a woman who now helps at the shelter, but once lived in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. "You'd never believe where she came from," the volunteer told me, lowering her voice. "Or how quickly it all fell apart." My curiosity was immediately piqued. After the event, we sat down for coffee, and she shared what she knew of Isabel's journey. I was so moved that I reached out to several people connected to the story, including former associates and community members who witnessed her transformation. What emerged was a narrative so compelling that I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. I found myself reflecting on my own secrets and the facades we all maintain. The more I learned about Isabel, the more I realized her story wasn't just about a scandal or a fall from grace. It was about the universal human experience of hiding parts of ourselves and the consequences that follow. With permission from those involved, with names and identifying details changed, I'm sharing this remarkable account with you today. Not for sensation, but for the profound lessons it offers us all. Imagine this. You wake up in a 15,000 square foot mansion with marble floors beneath your feet. Your closet holds designer clothes worth more than most people's annual salary. Your calendar is filled with exclusive galas and board meetings. Your name carries weight in the highest social circles. Then picture the same life completely dismantled in a matter of weeks. This is exactly what happened to Isabel Monroe. One moment, she was hosting charity events in her ballroom, and the next, she was struggling to find a place to sleep. The mansion, the luxury cars, the influential friends, all vanished like morning mist. And the catalyst for this dramatic reversal? A secret she had buried for decades. A single encounter at a high society event triggered a chain reaction that exposed everything she had worked so carefully to hide. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the dramatic fall. It's that Isabel's secret wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't criminal activity or a hidden affair. It was something far more complex, something rooted in survival and desperation. Something that forces us to ask ourselves, what would I have done in her position? And could I withstand the consequences if my own carefully constructed identity were suddenly stripped away? Before we continue with Isabel's remarkable journey, I want to take a moment to connect with you all. If you're finding yourself drawn into this story already, if you're curious about how someone can lose everything yet ultimately gain something more valuable, then this channel is definitely for you. These stories of transformation and life-altering moments are what Twists of Love and Fate is all about. We explore the human condition through real experiences that challenge us to think differently about our own lives. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss these powerful narratives. Tap the like button if you appreciate stories that go beyond surface-level drama to reveal deeper truths. Your engagement helps our community grow and allows these important lessons to reach more people who might need them. And I especially love reading your thoughts in the comment section. What secrets do you think are worth keeping? Have you ever had to reinvent yourself? Your insights add richness to our discussions and often help others who might be silently struggling with similar challenges. Now let's return to Isabel's story, a tale that will take us from the heights of luxury to the depths of loss, and ultimately to a place of unexpected redemption. As we delve deeper into Isabel's story, I want you to keep one central truth in mind. The price of living a lie can be far greater than facing your truth. This isn't just the moral of Isabel's journey. It's a principle that applies to all our lives in ways both large and small. We all wear masks at times. We all present versions of ourselves that we believe will be more acceptable, more lovable, more successful. But at what cost? For Isabel, the cost was everything she thought she valued. Her carefully constructed identity provided wealth, status, and security until it didn't. When her past caught up with her, the foundation she had built her life upon crumbled completely. Yet in losing everything external, she discovered something essential about herself and about authentic living. Her story challenges us to examine our own lives. Where are we sacrificing authenticity for acceptance? What parts of ourselves have we hidden away out of fear or shame? And what might happen if we chose courage over concealment? As we follow Isabel from her mansion to homelessness and beyond, we'll witness how devastating secrets can be, but also how liberating truth can become, even when it initially destroys everything we thought we wanted. This is a story about falling apart, yes, but more importantly, it's about putting yourself back together with integrity. Let's begin. Isabel and Gregory Monroe lived a life that most people only glimpse in magazines or movies. Their days unfolded in a carefully choreographed dance of luxury and privilege. Breakfast was served on hand-painted china in their sun-drenched conservatory, overlooking meticulously landscaped gardens. Their personal chef prepared seasonal delicacies, while their household staff maintained the immaculate order of their surroundings. Evenings often found them attending exclusive events or hosting intimate dinner parties where the wine cost more than a month's rent for the average person. Their closets resembled boutiques, filled with custom-made clothing and accessories from the world's most prestigious designers. Vacations meant private jets to remote islands or penthouses in global capitals. Even their casual outings, a simple lunch or afternoon shopping, were executed with an effortless elegance that spoke of generations of wealth. Yet for all this opulence, it was the small details that truly defined their lifestyle. The fresh flowers delivered daily, the art collection curated by renowned experts, and the ease with which they navigated a world where money was never a concern, only taste, connections, and social standing. In the social hierarchy of their affluent community, the Monroes weren't merely participants, they were arbiters. Gregory's financial acumen had transformed a modest investment firm into a powerhouse that managed billions. His reputation for identifying opportunities before they became obvious to others made him the darling of economic forecasters and business publications. Isabel, meanwhile, had cultivated her own sphere of influence. She chaired the boards of 3 major cultural institutions and had a gift for fundraising that made her indispensable to the city's philanthropic community. When she championed a cause, checkbooks opened. When she endorsed an artist, galleries competed for their work. Together, they were a force that commanded both respect and envy. Their marriage appeared to be a perfect partnership. Gregory provided the financial genius, Isabel the social brilliance. They moved through ballrooms and boardrooms with equal confidence, their names on every significant guest list and committee. "The Monroes are attending" was a phrase that elevated any event's status. Their approval could launch careers or charitable initiatives. Their criticism, even implied, could derail ambitions. They weren't merely wealthy, they were influential in ways that transcended money. They had that most valuable of social currencies, the power to include or exclude, to elevate or dismiss. And they wielded this power with apparent grace and generosity, making their position at the apex of society seem not just deserved, but somehow inevitable, as though they had been born to this role, rather than having achieved it through calculation and effort. The Monroe Mansion stood as the physical embodiment of their success. A 19th-century estate that had been meticulously restored and modernized, without sacrificing its historical character. Set on 5 acres of prime real estate, the limestone facade, with its classical columns and perfect symmetry, projected permanence and authority. Inside, 22 rooms flowed into one another with architectural precision. The grand foyer featured a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier that had once hung in a European palace. The formal dining room could seat 30 guests beneath hand-painted ceiling murals. The library housed first editions behind glass cases, while the media room contained technology so advanced it seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed. Each space had been designed to impress while appearing effortless, a difficult balance achieved through the work of internationally acclaimed interior designers and millions in carefully allocated funds. The art collection alone was insured for 8 figures, featuring works that museums had tried unsuccessfully to acquire. But beyond its aesthetic value, the mansion served a strategic purpose. It was where deals were sealed over Brandy and Gregory's study, where Isabel hosted intimate gatherings that determined which causes would receive funding, and where the couple showcased their position at society's pinnacle. The house wasn't merely where they lived. It was a stage set for their performance of success, a tangible statement that the Monroes had arrived and intended to remain. To those who attended her garden parties or charity galas, Isabel Monroe appeared the very definition of confidence and poise. Her laugh, musical and perfectly timed, could put nervous newcomers at ease or signal appreciation for a witty remark. Her posture, straight but not rigid, conveyed both authority and approachability. She remembered names, children's accomplishments, and personal details that made each guest feel uniquely valued. "Isabel has a gift," people often remarked. "She makes you feel like you're the only person in the room." What none of them saw were the moments before each social appearance. Isabel alone in her dressing room, practicing her smile in the mirror, rehearsing anecdotes, and taking slow, deliberate breaths to calm the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. They didn't see how she sometimes excused herself during events to stand alone in a bathroom, eyes closed, counting backward from 100 until her heart stopped racing. They never noticed how her fingers occasionally trembled when someone mentioned their childhood or asked about her family background. The public Isabel was gracious, knowledgeable about art and literature, and seemingly born to privilege. She spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. The private Isabel was vigilant, constantly monitoring her speech for slips that might reveal her origins. She studied etiquette books in secret and watched how old money wives handled themselves. She maintained a mental catalog of details about her fabricated past, ready to deploy them naturally in conversation. This exhausting duality, the flawless exterior and the vigilant interior, created a chasm within her that widened with each passing year. For 15 years, Isabel had lived as someone else. 15 years of constructing and maintaining an identity built on carefully crafted half-truths and strategic omissions. The weight of this deception had become so familiar that she sometimes forgot it was there, until something triggered a memory or threatened to expose a contradiction. Each morning began with the same ritual. She would wake before Gregory and spend a few minutes remembering who she was supposed to be. Isabel Monroe, daughter of a retired diplomat, educated at prestigious schools, raised in comfortable affluence. Not Emma Reeves, who had grown up in poverty, dropped out of high school when she became pregnant, and spent years working multiple jobs just to survive. The transformation had begun as a temporary measure, a way to secure a position at an upscale gallery where her natural eye for art had caught the owner's attention. But one small deception led to another, then another, until Emma had completely disappeared beneath Isabel's polished exterior. Meeting Gregory had not been part of the plan. Falling in love with him had been even less expected. By the time he proposed, the lie had grown too complex to unravel. Telling the truth would mean losing not just him, but the entire life she had built. "It's not really lying," she told herself in moments of doubt. "I am Isabel now. Emma doesn't exist anymore." But in quiet moments, when she saw a young single mother struggling with groceries, or when news reports covered neighborhoods like the one she'd escaped, Emma would resurface, bringing with her a flood of guilt and fear. These moments had become more frequent lately, as if her former self was fighting to be acknowledged after years of suppression. The secret identity wasn't just something she carried. It had become a lens through which she viewed every relationship, every conversation, every public appearance. Always calculating the risk of exposure, always maintaining the narrative, always wondering, what would happen if they knew? Before she was Isabel Monroe, she was Emma Reeves, a 19-year-old single mother living in a one-bedroom apartment with water stains on the ceiling and unreliable heat. Her days began at 5 a.m. when she would prepare bottles for her infant daughter Lily, before dropping her at a neighbor's apartment and rushing to the first of her 3 jobs. Waitressing breakfast shifts, administrative work at a small insurance office in the afternoons, and evening shifts at a convenience store when she could get them. Sleep came in precious 4-hour increments, often interrupted by Lily's cries or the noise from the apartment above. Emma's own mother had passed away when she was 16, and her father's alcoholism had made him an unreliable presence at best, dangerous at worst. There was no safety net, no family to call when the rent came due, but the paycheck hadn't, or when Lily developed a fever that required medication Emma couldn't afford. What Emma did have was determination and an unexpected gift for recognizing quality in art and design. She would spend her rare free moments in libraries devouring books on art history and contemporary artists. Sometimes, when Lily was asleep, she would sketch, dreams of beautiful spaces and the life she imagined beyond the walls of their cramped apartment. The opportunity came unexpectedly. The owner of an upscale art gallery visited the insurance office where Emma worked. While waiting for his appointment, he noticed how she had arranged the modest lobby with an eye for balance and visual appeal. When he commented on it, Emma surprised herself by engaging him in a knowledgeable discussion about the single original painting on the wall, correctly identifying the artist and period. "You should work in the arts," he remarked, impressed. "I'm looking for an assistant at my gallery." The salary he mentioned casually was more than Emma's 3 jobs combined. It would mean stability, health insurance for Lily, perhaps even savings. But when he asked about her background, assuming she must have studied art history, Emma hesitated only briefly before the first lie formed on her lips. "Yes, I studied at..." She named a well-regarded state university she'd once dreamed of attending. The lie worked. He invited her to interview formally the following week. That night, Emma sat at her kitchen table until dawn, researching the university's art program, memorizing professors' names and course descriptions, creating a past she had never experienced. The moral questions tormented her. Was it wrong to lie if it meant giving Lily a better life? Was it theft to claim knowledge she had acquired through self-study rather than formal education? Would anyone really be harmed? By morning, exhausted but resolved, Emma had made her decision. She would become someone new, someone whose background wouldn't limit her opportunities or her daughter's future. The deception felt less like a choice and more like survival. The transformation from Emma to Isabel didn't happen overnight. It began with small adjustments, changing her accent slightly, adopting more formal speech patterns, investing in a few quality clothing pieces from consignment shops. She created a detailed backstory, parents in diplomatic service explaining why no one local knew them, childhood spent partly abroad justifying any gaps in cultural knowledge, and a personal tragedy that made her reluctant to discuss her past, discouraging too many questions. The hardest part was Lily. How could she explain to a 3-year-old that mommy had a new name now? The solution was painful but necessary. Emma arranged for her daughter to live with her most trusted friend, a kind woman who had always loved Lily. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until Isabel was established enough to safely reintroduce her daughter into her life. "It's not abandonment," she told herself through tears after each weekend visit. "It's sacrifice. I'm doing this for her." The gallery position led to others, each more prestigious than the last. Emma, now fully inhabiting Isabel, developed a reputation for her impeccable taste and business acumen. She learned to move in wealthy circles, carefully observing the subtle social codes that distinguish those born to privilege from those who merely acquired money. With each step up the social ladder, The possibility of reclaiming her daughter seemed to recede. How could she explain Lily's sudden appearance? The risk of exposure grew alongside her success, creating a painful paradox. The more she achieved for Lily's sake, the more impossible it became to reunite with her. Gregory Monroe entered Isabel's life 6 years into her reinvention. By then, she had become the director of a prestigious gallery, and he was a rising star in finance with old family connections but new money hunger. They met at a museum fundraiser, where Isabel had curated a special exhibition that caught Gregory's attention. Not just for the art, but for the beautiful, knowledgeable woman who spoke about it with such passion. Their courtship was swift and intense. Gregory saw in Isabel not just a beautiful partner, but a strategic one. Someone whose cultural refinement complemented his financial expertise. Isabel saw in Gregory the security and legitimacy she had been seeking, along with genuine affection that surprised her with its intensity. When he proposed after 8 months, Isabel faced her greatest moral test. Marriage would mean legal documents, family introductions, a deeper level of deception. It would also mean permanently severing the possibility of reuniting with Lily, who was now 9 and had come to see her weekend aunt as a loving but peripheral figure in her life. The night before giving Gregory her answer, Isabel visited Lily, watching her sleep and whispering apologies the child couldn't hear. By morning, her decision was made. She would marry Gregory, ensure Lily's guardian was generously provided for through anonymous arrangements, and fully embrace the life she had created. Together, Isabel and Gregory became a formidable team. Her connections in the art world complemented his financial ventures. His wealth allowed her to establish herself as a significant philanthropist. They built their empire methodically, each enhancing the other's strengths while presenting a united front of success and sophistication to the world. Despite her outward success, fear remained Isabel's constant companion. Each new level of prominence increased the risk of exposure. She developed subtle strategies to protect herself, avoiding photographers whenever possible, declining invitations to events where people from her past might appear, creating a reputation for valuing privacy that most respected without question. The digital age brought new anxieties. Social media and internet searches made maintaining separate identities increasingly difficult. Isabel vigilantly monitored online mentions of both her current name and her former one, paying a discreet service to remove any connections that might appear. Certain triggers could send her into private panic. A waitress with Lily's smile, overhearing someone mention her hometown, or the rare occasions when Gregory asked about her childhood. These moments would activate physical symptoms, racing heart, tight chest, the sensation of walls closing in, that she became expert at hiding behind a poised exterior. Sleep often eluded her. In the darkness, questions would surface that daylight kept at bay. What would happen if Gregory discovered the truth? Would all they had built together collapse? Would he see her entire personality as a fabrication? And most painfully, had the deception been worth the loss of watching her daughter grow up? As the years passed, these fears didn't diminish, they evolved and deepened. The higher she climbed, the farther she could fall. The more people who knew Isabel Monroe, the greater the risk that someone might remember Emma Reeves. The more she achieved, the more she stood to lose. The weight of her secret identity had become so integrated with her existence that Isabel sometimes wondered if there was any authentic self left beneath the layers of careful construction, or if she had become the ultimate performance artist, creating a masterpiece of deception that no one was allowed to recognize as fiction. The annual Children's Hospital Benefit Gala was the crown jewel of the city's charity season. Held in the Monroe Mansion's grand ballroom, it transformed their already impressive home into a fantasy landscape of twinkling lights, rare orchids, and ice sculptures that caught and refracted the glow of custom chandeliers. 200 of the city's most influential citizens moved through the space in designer formal wear, the combined net worth in the room sufficient to fund the hospital for decades. Isabel, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that had been created specifically for her, was in her element, or appeared to be. She moved from group to group with practiced grace, ensuring each guest felt welcomed and appreciated. Gregory worked the room separately, their divide-and-conquer approach to hosting long established as the most effective. "Mrs. Monroe, the evening is spectacular," the hospital's chief of surgery complimented her. "You've outdone yourself this year." Isabel accepted the praise with a modest smile, deflecting credit to her committee. It was during this conversation that she first noticed the woman standing near the entrance, tall, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Something about the woman's posture, the way she surveyed the room with clinical detachment, sent a chill through Isabel. There was a vague familiarity that she couldn't immediately place, like a word hovering at the edge of memory. Then their eyes met across the crowded room, and Isabel knew. Evelyn Hart had aged in the 15 years since Isabel had last seen her, but there was no mistaking those penetrating eyes. As the director of social services at the community center where Emma Reeves had once sought assistance, Evelyn had been both helper and witness to the most desperate period of her life. Isabel excused herself from the conversation and moved toward a quiet alcove, hoping to compose herself. But Evelyn had already begun making her way across the room with deliberate steps. "What a beautiful event," Evelyn said when she reached Isabel, her voice low but clear. "I'm here representing the Downtown Children's Coalition. We received an invitation quite unexpectedly." "How wonderful," Isabel responded, her social mask firmly in place despite her racing heart. "We try to include organizations of all sizes." "Indeed." Evelyn's gaze was steady, unflinching. "It's remarkable how life's paths cross and recross, isn't it? People change, transform entirely sometimes, yet the past has a way of persisting." The conversation continued for perhaps 2 minutes, an exchange that appeared cordial to any observers, but was charged with unspoken meaning. Evelyn never explicitly said, "I know who you are," but every carefully chosen word made it clear she recognized the woman formerly known as Emma Reeves beneath Isabel Monroe's polished exterior. "Your daughter must be, 18 now?" Evelyn asked just before departing, the question landing like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, you must be confusing me with someone else," Isabel managed to reply, her voice steady even as her world began to tilt. "Must I?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "My mistake." Within an hour of Evelyn's departure, Isabel noticed the first subtle shift in the atmosphere. The conversation stopped abruptly as she approached. A longtime acquaintance studied her face with new curiosity. The wife of a prominent judge leaned to whisper something to her companion, both women glancing in Isabel's direction. Gregory, attuned to the social currents of their world, appeared at her side. "Is everything all right?" "You seem tense." "Just tired," she assured him, squeezing his arm affectionately. "It's been a long evening." But as the last guests departed and the staff began the cleanup, Isabel's phone chimed with a text from Caroline Winters, one of her closest allies in their social circle. "Call me immediately. Something's circulating about you." By morning, the whispers had multiplied. 3 board members from her favorite charity called to cancel lunch appointments. The society columnist who had always covered Isabel favorably sent an email requesting comment on allegations regarding her background and identity. Isabel sat in her private study, doors locked, attempting to control her breathing as she scrolled through her phone. Social media was already buzzing with vague references to the Monroe situation and questions about Isabel's past. Nothing specific yet, but the digital murmurs were growing louder by the hour. She considered her options: deny everything, offer a partial confession, disappear temporarily. Each path seemed to lead to the same destination: exposure and collapse. The first concrete evidence appeared online 3 days after the gala, a digitized newspaper clipping from 15 years earlier, showing a much younger Emma Reeves accepting a Community Achievement Award for completing a job training program while raising a child alone. The photo quality was poor, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Next came records from the apartment complex where she had lived, followed by statements from former neighbors who recalled that poor young mother who disappeared. Someone had methodically assembled the pieces of Emma's life and laid them alongside Isabel's carefully constructed narrative, highlighting the impossibilities in her timeline. Gregory confronted her in their bedroom. his face ashen as he held out his tablet displaying an article titled "The Real Isabel Monroe, A Story of Deception." "Tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice barely audible. "Tell me there's an explanation." For a moment, Isabel considered continuing the lie, creating some elaborate explanation involving identity theft or malicious fabrication. But 15 years of deception had suddenly become too heavy to sustain. "I can explain," she began, her voice breaking, "but not in the way you want me to." As she spoke, haltingly at first, then in a rush of long-suppressed truth, she watched Gregory's expression shift from disbelief to shock to a cold, distant anger. The man who had loved Isabel Monroe could not reconcile her with Emma Reeves, the woman who had lied about everything from her education to her family to her very name. "You never existed," he said when she finished. "The woman I married was a fiction." Before we continue with Isabel's story and discover how her life completely unraveled after this confrontation with Gregory, I want to pause and ask you, my viewers, to reflect on her situation. If you were in Emma's position all those years ago, a struggling single mother with limited options and a child depending on you, would you have made the same choice? Would you have created a new identity if it meant escaping poverty and providing opportunities for your child? Or would you have chosen a different path, regardless of the hardships? The moral complexity of Isabel's decisions is what makes her story so compelling. She didn't steal or physically harm anyone, yet her deception affected countless relationships and ultimately caused tremendous pain, including to herself. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious about where you stand on this ethical dilemma. Would you sacrifice authenticity for opportunity? Would you live a lie to create a better life? Or do you believe the truth must always prevail, no matter the cost? If you're finding value in this story and the questions it raises about identity, truth, and the choices we make when desperate, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might benefit from these difficult but important conversations. Now, let's return to Isabel as her carefully constructed world begins to collapse around her. The media descended like a well-coordinated army. What began as whispers in society columns exploded into front-page headlines and primetime news segments. Socialites' secret past exposed screamed one tabloid, while more respectable outlets opted for the equally damaging Monroe identity, the woman who never was. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, telephoto lenses trained on windows, hoping to capture images of the family in crisis. Drones occasionally appeared above the property, prompting Gregory to hire additional security. Former acquaintances from Emma's past were tracked down and interviewed, their recollections, some accurate, others embellished for the cameras, adding fuel to the growing inferno. The story proved irresistible. A beautiful woman who had climbed from poverty to the pinnacle of wealth and social power through calculated deception. Every aspect of Isabel's life was dissected and re-examined through this new lens. Art acquisitions she had overseen were scrutinized for authenticity. Charities she had championed were questioned about their vetting processes. Even her fashion choices became subject to analysis. Had she been deliberately copying the style of genuine socialites to better blend in? Most painful were the discussions about Lily. When journalists discovered that Isabel had a daughter she had effectively abandoned in pursuit of her new identity, the narrative shifted from fascinating social scandal to moral outrage. The woman who had chaired children's charities while separated from her own child became a symbol of hypocrisy rather than reinvention. Isabel stopped watching television, disabled her social media accounts, and instructed staff to dispose of newspapers and magazines unread. But there was no escaping the reality that her two worlds, the one she had fled and the one she had created, had violently collided, leaving nothing intact. One day, she would whisper to her sleeping daughter, "We'll have a home with a garden. You'll never worry about anything. I promise." But promises were easier made than kept, and as Lily's third birthday approached, Emma faced the harsh reality that her situation wasn't improving. Despite her exhausting schedule, they were one emergency away from homelessness. Gregory Monroe had built his reputation on sound judgment and impeccable instincts. He prided himself on seeing through deception. on never being the mark in any transaction. The revelation that he had been so thoroughly deceived by the woman sharing his bed for nearly a decade shattered something fundamental in his understanding of himself. In the weeks following the exposure, he moved through the mansion like a ghost, sleeping in a guest suite and spending long hours in his study. When he and Isabel did speak, their conversations were brief and practical, focused on managing the crisis rather than addressing the broken trust between them. Yet despite his anger, Gregory found himself caught in an emotional paradox. The woman he had fallen in love with, her intelligence, her compassion, her determination, had not been entirely fictional. The qualities that had drawn him to Isabel existed in Emma as well, perhaps even more authentically given what she had overcome. Late at night, reviewing old photographs or remembering particular moments from their marriage, he would feel the pull of those genuine connections. There had been real laughter, real passion, real partnership amid the fabrications. "Did you ever love me?" he asked her one evening, finding her alone in the kitchen long after the staff had departed. "Or was that part of the performance too?" "That was always real," she answered, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time in days. Maybe the only real thing. The moment of connection was brief but powerful, a reminder of what they had shared beyond the lies. But by morning, as fresh headlines appeared and new business complications arose, the walls between them had rebuilt themselves, higher and more impenetrable than before. The business repercussions were swift and severe. Gregory's investment firm, which managed billions in assets for wealthy clients and institutions, began experiencing significant withdrawals within days of the scandal breaking. Clients cited concerns about judgment and questions of due diligence in their carefully worded departure letters. Board members called emergency meetings to discuss whether Gregory's personal situation reflected a broader failure of vetting processes. Partners who had eagerly associated with the Monroe name now distanced themselves, concerned about contamination by association. Deals that had been nearly finalized were suddenly under review, with counterparties requesting additional assurances and guarantees. The legal complications multiplied daily. Investors questioned whether Isabel's presence at certain business functions had constituted fraud. Regulatory agencies initiated reviews of transactions where she had been present, examining whether her misrepresented background had influenced financial decisions. Gregory's legal team worked around the clock to contain the damage, but the trajectory was clear. The empire he had spent decades building was eroding rapidly, with each day bringing new defections and challenges. His personal fortune, while still substantial, was diminishing as he deployed resources to fight legal battles and buy out partners who wanted to separate completely. "They're using her as an excuse," his chief counsel admitted during a late-night strategy session. "But the damage is real. We're looking at a 30% devaluation at minimum, possibly much worse if the institutional investors continue to pull out." For a man whose identity had been built around financial success, watching his company's value plummet was like witnessing his own slow-motion execution. Each market report, each client departure, each canceled contract was another blow to the foundation of his self-worth. For Isabel, the emotional devastation was absolute. The carefully maintained boundary between Emma Reeves and Isabel Monroe had dissolved, leaving her suspended between identities, no longer able to fully inhabit either one. Former friends stopped returning calls. Charitable organizations removed her name from donor lists and board rosters. Social invitations ceased entirely. The psychological toll manifested physically. She lost weight rapidly, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Sleep became elusive, replaced by hours of staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from both her lives and wondering where different choices might have led. Her hands developed a slight tremor that made even applying makeup difficult. Most painful was the renewed separation from Lily. Now 18 and in college, her daughter had been approached by journalists and learned the full truth about her mother's double life. The carefully maintained fiction that Aunt Isabel was a family friend who helped support her education had collapsed, replaced by a complex reality that the young woman was ill-equipped to process. "She doesn't want to see you," Lily's guardian informed Isabel during a brief, difficult phone call. She needs time to understand what happened and why you made the choices you did. This second loss of her daughter, this time due to truth rather than lies, cut deeper than any society rejection or media attack. The original purpose of her transformation had been to create a better life for Lily. Now that very transformation had potentially destroyed any chance of a relationship with her child. In rare moments of clarity amid the emotional chaos, Isabel recognized the irony. She had sacrificed authentic connection with her daughter to provide financial security, only to lose both in the end. The realization brought not wisdom, but a hollowness that seemed to expand within her, consuming whatever remained of her former confidence and purpose. 3 months after the scandal broke, Gregory called Isabel to his study. The room, once a warm space filled with leather-bound books and comfortable furniture, had taken on the sterile atmosphere of a corporate office during layoffs. Legal documents covered the desk, and Gregory himself looked like a man who had aged years in weeks, his face drawn, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. "My attorneys have prepared separation papers," he said without preamble, gesturing to the stack before him. "I've tried to be fair. You'll receive a settlement that should allow you to live comfortably, though obviously not at the level you've become accustomed to." Isabel nodded, having expected this moment since the first headlines appeared. What surprised her was not the decision, but the continued formality between them, as if they were dissolving a business partnership rather than a marriage. "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't contest anything." Gregory looked at her then, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since the revelation. "I keep asking myself what was real," he said, his voice losing its professional edge. "Were there moments, any moments, when you weren't playing a role, when I actually knew the real you?" The question hung between them, heavy with a decade of shared history suddenly called into question. "All of it was real," she finally answered. "The love, the partnership, the life we built. The only fiction was my past, not my present with you." Gregory's expression softened briefly before hardening again into resolve. "I might have believed that once," he said. "But I don't know how to separate the truth from the performance anymore. And I can't rebuild my life while trying to solve that puzzle." He slid the papers across the desk. "My lawyer will contact yours to finalize details. I'll be relocating to the London office next week. The house will be sold as part of the asset liquidation." With those words, practical, final, devoid of the emotion that had once defined their relationship, Gregory effectively ended not just their marriage, but Isabel's entire existence as she had known it for 15 years. The mansion emptied with startling efficiency. Teams of appraisers moved through the rooms, cataloging items for auction. Art collectors circled like elegant vultures, eager to acquire pieces from the dissolving Monroe collection. Staff who had served Isabel for years now avoided eye contact, their loyalty shifting to future employment prospects, rather than a fallen employer. Isabel wandered through the increasingly barren rooms like a ghost, haunting her own life. The grand staircase where she had descended for countless galas now echoed hollowly under her steps. The master suite, once a sanctuary of luxury, contained only a temporary bed and the few personal items she had been permitted to retain before the estate liquidation. She found herself lingering in spaces that held particular memories: the conservatory, where she and Gregory had shared morning coffee, the library corner where she had read during rainstorms, the small alcove where she had once hidden to compose herself during an overwhelming party. Each location held echoes of a happiness that now seemed as fabricated as her identity. The legal proceedings had moved with brutal speed, accelerated by her unwillingness to contest Gregory's terms and his determination to resolve matters quickly. The settlement, while substantial by normal standard, represented a fraction of the wealth she had grown accustomed to. More significantly, it came with no social connections, no professional standing, and no identity beyond the woman who lied about everything. On her final night in the mansion, Isabel sat alone on the floor of the empty ballroom, a single lamp casting long shadows across the space where hundreds had once gathered to celebrate and admire the life she had created. Tomorrow, the keys would be transferred to the real estate firm handling the sale. Tonight, she allowed herself one last moment to mourn, not just the luxury, but the sense of belonging it had represented. The transition from extraordinary wealth to ordinary circumstances might have been manageable. The shift from ordinary to precarious proved far more challenging. Isabel's settlement, which had seemed substantial, began to evaporate with alarming speed. Legal fees consumed the first significant portion as she required representation for various lawsuits filed by organizations claiming fraud. The tax implications of the divorce settlement claimed another substantial chunk. Then came the practical reality that she had no marketable skills under her real identity, and her reputation made employment under either name virtually impossible. She downsized repeatedly, first to a luxury apartment, then to a modest condo, then to a small rental unit in an increasingly marginal neighborhood. Each move required selling more possessions, each sale a reminder of how temporary her claim to them had always been. 6 months after leaving the mansion, Isabel faced the humiliating process of applying for a studio apartment in a building she would once have driven past without noticing. The property manager, recognizing her from news coverage, rejected her application despite her ability to pay the deposit. "We don't need your kind of trouble here," he said bluntly. Similar rejections followed, some explicit, others hidden behind excuses about credit checks or reference requirements. Her past made her untouchable in respectable circles, while her lack of verifiable employment history closed doors in less discriminating ones. When the last of her liquid assets went to paying a medical bill, treatment for the anxiety and depression that had become her constant companions, Isabel faced the unthinkable. She had nowhere to go. Homelessness arrived not as a sudden catastrophe, but as a series of incremental losses. First came nights in budget hotels, then in her car parked in 24-hour store lots, and finally, when the car was repossessed, in the city's shelter system. The shelters represented a particular cruelty of fate. Years earlier, as Isabel Monroe, she had chaired fundraising galas for these very institutions, smiling in designer gowns as she encouraged wealthy donors to support the less fortunate. Now she stood in line for a bed, clutching her single remaining suitcase, avoiding the curious stares of those who thought she looked familiar but couldn't quite place her. The physical hardships, uncomfortable beds, lack of privacy, constant noise, restricted shower access, were difficult but manageable. The psychological impact proved far more devastating. Each morning brought the ritual humiliation of leaving the shelter by the required time, regardless of weather, and facing hours of nowhere to go and nothing meaningful to do. She spent days in public libraries, both for shelter and to use computers in her increasingly desperate search for employment. Evenings often found her in fast food restaurants, nursing a single coffee for hours to stay warm and dry. The settlement money, once seemingly substantial, had become a distant memory, replaced by the daily calculation of how to afford food while saving enough for a security deposit should housing ever become available. The woman who had once moved effortlessly through the highest echelons of society now became expert at invisibility, keeping her head down, avoiding eye contact, learning which public spaces would tolerate her presence without purchase and which would quickly ask her to move along. She developed the hypervigilance common to those without secure shelter, always aware of exits, bathroom locations, and the shifting moods of security personnel. The lowest point came on a rainy Tuesday, 9 months after the scandal first broke. Isabel had spent the morning at a promising job interview for a retail position, only to be recognized by the manager, who then curtly ended the meeting. Discouraged and soaked from the walk back to the downtown area, she sought refuge in a coffee shop bathroom to dry off and collect herself. As she dabbed at her wet clothes with paper towels, the bathroom door opened and a woman in an expensive suit entered. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Isabel recognized Caroline Winters, once one of her closest friends in her former social circle. Caroline's expression shifted from surprise to discomfort to something resembling pity. "Isabel," she said, her voice lowered as if they were sharing a shameful secret. "My God, what's happened to you?" Before Isabel could respond, Caroline opened her designer purse, extracted several $20 bills, and placed them on the counter with an awkward pat on Isabel's shoulder. "Get yourself something to eat," she said, then quickly exited without waiting for a response. Staring at the money, offered with the casual condescension one might show a street beggar rather than a former equal, something broke inside Isabel. The careful compartmentalization she had maintained between her past and present selves, between Emma and Isabel, between dignity and desperation, collapsed entirely. She slid down the bathroom wall to the floor, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from some primal place beyond conscious control. The grief was not just for her current circumstances, but for the entirety of her fractured life. For the daughter she had lost twice, for the authentic connections sacrificed to ambition, for the person she might have been had she made different choices. Isabel remained on the bathroom floor until a concerned employee knocked, asking if she needed medical assistance. The simple human kindness in the question, so different from Caroline's performative charity, acted as a catalyst. She splashed cold water on her face, straightened her clothing as best she could, and looked directly at her reflection for what felt like the first time in months. The woman in the mirror was neither Emma Reeves nor Isabel Monroe. She was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of spectacular failure and profound loss. Her designer clothes were long gone, replaced by items from donation bins. Her expertly maintained appearance had given way to the practical simplicity of someone with limited resources. Yet her eyes held something that had been absent during both her struggling years as Emma and her privileged years as Isabel. Clarity. "Enough," she whispered to her reflection. "Enough running, enough hiding." She left the bathroom with the money still on the counter, walked 6 blocks to the community center where she had once received assistance as a young mother, and asked to speak with the volunteer coordinator. The woman, busy with a stack of paperwork, barely looked up. "We're always short-handed," she said, pushing a form across the desk. "Fill this out if you're interested in helping." Isabel took the form and a pen, hesitating only briefly at the line requesting her name. Then, with a steadiness that surprised her, she wrote Emma Reeves for the first time in 15 years. It wasn't a dramatic moment of transformation. No heavenly choir sang, no weight visibly lifted from her shoulders. But as she completed the form with her real information, her real history, her real skills, her real challenges, she felt something shift internally. The exhaustion of maintaining dual identities, of constantly monitoring her words and reactions, began to ease. "I can start today," she told the coordinator, handing back the completed form. "I don't have anywhere else to be." It was a small step, volunteering at the very organization that had once helped her, but it represented something profound. The decision to build a life based on truth rather than convenience, on authentic connection rather than strategic advantage. The path forward remained unclear and would certainly be difficult, but for the first time since her exposure, Emma felt something resembling hope. Emma's first day volunteering at the downtown community center involved sorting donated clothing, a task both mundane and symbolic. As she carefully separated usable items from those too damaged to distribute, she couldn't help but reflect on her own sorting process. Which parts of her past could be salvaged? Which experiences might still hold value? Which aspects of herself were worth preserving? The volunteer coordinator, Diane, assigned her increasingly responsible tasks as days turned to weeks. Emma moved from clothing distribution to meal service, then to intake interviews where she helped new arrivals navigate the complex web of social services. Her background, both as someone who had once needed these services and as someone who had later moved in wealthy circles, gave her a unique perspective that proved unexpectedly valuable. "You explain things clearly?" an elderly man told her after she helped him complete housing assistance forms. "Like you understand both sides." The community center became more than just a place to volunteer. It provided structure to days that had become formless, purpose to a life that had lost direction, and most importantly, a space where her past was neither hidden nor defining. Here, in this modest building with its fluorescent lighting and mismatched furniture, Emma began the slow process of reintegration. not into society's upper echelons, but into the basic human community from which her deception had isolated her. The work was exhausting in ways her former charity involvement had never been. Instead of writing checks or making appearances at fundraisers, she now spent hours on her feet serving meals, listening to heartbreaking stories, and witnessing firsthand the daily struggles of those living on society's margins. Yet this direct engagement brought a satisfaction that her previous philanthropic efforts, however well-intentioned, had never provided. 3 months into her volunteer work, Emma met Williams during the center's weekly job skills workshop. At first glance, he seemed an unlikely mentor, a middle-aged man with weathered features and calloused hands who spoke little and observed much. But as she assisted with his resume preparation, his story gradually emerged. Williams had once been a successful contractor with his own business, a home in the suburbs, and a family. A series of misfortunes, an injury, an economic downturn, a divorce, had stripped away these anchors, leaving him homeless for nearly 2 years. Unlike many others she had met at the center, Williams spoke of this period without bitterness or self-pity. "Lost everything but myself," he told her during one session. "Took me a while to realize that was enough to start over." Through persistent effort and the support of organizations like the Community Center, Williams had gradually rebuilt his life. He now lived in a modest apartment, worked steady construction jobs, and volunteered his skills to help others. His resilience wasn't dramatic or performative. It was a quiet, consistent determination to move forward regardless of setbacks. People get caught up thinking about what they lost, he observed one day as they walked from the center to a nearby coffee shop. A small luxury Emma had recently allowed herself again. But that's looking backward. Only thing that matters is what you do with what you've got left. The simplicity of his philosophy struck Emma deeply. She had been defining herself by what she had lost, status, wealth, relationships, rather than by what remained. Her intelligence, her work ethic, her capacity for empathy, all qualities that had existed before her transformation into Isabel and had survived her fall. Williams became not just a source of inspiration, but a practical guide to living authentically with limited resources. He showed her which grocery stores offered the best values, which employers were willing to hire people with complicated backgrounds, and how to find joy in small pleasures rather than grand luxuries. Emma's transformation wasn't a smooth upward trajectory, but a series of halting steps forward, often followed by painful retreats. Each small victory, securing part-time work as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit, finding a room to rent in a shared apartment, reconnecting with a few former acquaintances who showed unexpected forgiveness, was balanced by setbacks that tested her newfound resolve. The most profound changes occurred not through dramatic epiphanies, but through daily interactions with those she helped. Explaining housing options to a young mother reminded her of her own struggles and the strength she had shown even before her reinvention as Isabel. Assisting elderly residents with benefit applications taught her patience and the value of dignity, regardless of circumstances. Working alongside other volunteers, people who gave their time not for social advancement, but from genuine compassion, redefined her understanding of community. Gradually, Emma began to recognize that her experience straddling different worlds gave her unique insights. She could translate the often confusing language of social services into terms clients easily understood. She could help those seeking employment understand the unspoken expectations of professional environments. She could advocate effectively because she understood both the systems of power and the realities of powerlessness. "You have a gift for this work," Diane told her after observing Emma successfully mediate a tense situation between a frustrated client and an overwhelmed caseworker. "Have you considered pursuing social work professionally?" The suggestion startled Emma. She had been focused on survival, on rebuilding the most basic elements of a stable life. The idea of a professional future, of building a career rather than simply securing employment, hadn't seemed possible. Yet Diane's casual comment planted a seed that would slowly take root, the possibility that her greatest failures might somehow become the foundation for meaningful work. Despite her progress, public judgment remained a constant challenge. Emma still occasionally encountered people who recognized her from news coverage of the scandal. Some reacted with obvious disdain, others with uncomfortable curiosity, treating her as a cautionary tale rather than a person in recovery. A local news outlet ran a "Where Are They Now" feature that described her volunteer work in terms that managed to be simultaneously condescending and suspicious, implying her community service was merely another calculated performance. The article reopened wounds that had begun to heal and brought a fresh wave of unwanted attention to the center. "People love watching others fall," Williams told her after finding her hiding in the storage room, the newspaper crumpled beside her. "Makes them feel better about their own lives, but they get bored eventually. Something else will come along." More difficult than external judgment was Emma's internal shame. In quiet moments, doubts would surface with crushing force. Had she irreparably damaged her daughter's life? Had her deception hurt people beyond Gregory? Was her current work merely atonement rather than genuine service? The questions had no simple answers, and learning to live with this ambiguity became part of her recovery process. Therapy, which she eventually accessed through a community mental health program, provided abilities for managing these thoughts without being consumed by them. Her therapist, a practical woman with little interest in either condemning or absolving Emma's past choices, focused instead on building resilience for present challenges. "You can't undo what's done," she told Emma during one particularly difficult session. "But you can decide who you want to be now. That choice remains yours regardless of circumstances." Small victories accumulated slowly, each one rebuilding Emma's sense of self-worth in ways that her former wealth and status never had. The first time a client specifically requested her help with a housing application. The morning Diane asked her to train new volunteers. The day she received a modest raise at her part-time job, based not on who she pretended to be, but on the quality of her actual work. Perhaps most significant was the afternoon she received a text message from Lily, brief and cautious, but opening a door that had seemed permanently closed. "I'm trying to understand. Maybe we could talk sometime." Their first meeting was awkward and tearful, held in a neutral coffee shop with long silences and careful questions. Lily, now a poised young woman pursuing a degree in education, had clearly inherited her mother's determination, if not her capacity for deception. She asked direct questions about the choices Emma had made, listening to the answers with an expression that revealed neither forgiveness nor rejection. "I'm not sure what kind of relationship we can have," Lily said, as their time together drew to a close. "But I think I'd like to find out." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was possibility, something Emma had stopped believing in during her darkest days. Another milestone came when Emma was able to move from her shared living situation to a small studio apartment of her own. The space was modest by any standard and minuscule compared to the mansion she had once occupied. Yet the privacy, the ability to arrange her few possessions according to her own preferences, the simple dignity of having a key to her own door, these represented a security she valued far more deeply than she had the electronic gates and security systems of her former estate. On the evening she moved in, Williams and several other friends from the community center helped carry her meager furniture up 3 flights of stairs. They shared a simple meal of takeout pizza, eaten on folding chairs, laughing and telling stories as twilight filled the small space with soft shadows. Looking around at these people who knew her true history, yet chose to be present anyway, Emma felt something she had rarely experienced as Isabel. Despite all her material advantages, she felt at home. 2 years after her public downfall, Emma's life bore no external resemblance to Isabel Monroe's existence. Her studio apartment could have fit inside the master bathroom of her former mansion. Her wardrobe consisted of practical, durable items rather than designer labels. She took public transportation instead of being chauffeured in luxury vehicles. Her savings account held enough for emergencies, but not for extravagance. Yet these material downgrades had been accompanied by unexpected upgrades in less tangible areas. The constant anxiety that had shadowed her as Isabel, the fear of discovery, the pressure to maintain appearances, the exhaustion of perpetual performance, had gradually subsided. In its place came a different kind of security, the knowledge that those who remained in her life accepted her authentic self, complete with flaws and failures. Her modest apartment reflected this authenticity. Unlike the mansion, which had been decorated to impress others and project a specific image, her current space expressed her actual preferences. Books filled simple shelves, many borrowed from the library rather than purchased. The few art pieces were created by local artists she had met through community programs rather than acquired as investments. Plants thrived on windowsills, their growth marking the passing seasons and providing a tangible reminder of patience and care. Most evenings found her at home rather than attending social functions, cooking simple meals, reading, occasionally hosting small gatherings of friends. These quiet domestic pleasures, once dismissed as insufficient when she was climbing the social ladder, now provided a contentment that elaborate galas and exclusive events never had. The most profound change in Emma's life was the quality of her relationships. As Isabel, she had maintained hundreds of social connections, but few genuine friendships. People had been drawn to her status, her influence, her ability to advance their interests, not to her authentic self, which remained carefully hidden. Now, with nothing to offer but her genuine presence, Emma formed connections based on mutual support and shared experiences. Her friendship with Williams deepened into a partnership of equals, each contributing strengths and acknowledging vulnerabilities. Her relationships with colleagues at the community center and the nonprofit where she now worked full-time were built on respect for her abilities rather than deference to her position. Most surprising were the connections that formed when she began speaking openly about her experiences. Initially hesitant to discuss her past, Emma gradually recognized that her story, both her mistakes and her recovery, could serve others. She started by sharing in small support groups for women facing major life transitions, then expanded to community workshops on rebuilding after personal setbacks. "I lived what looked like a perfect life," she would tell these groups, "but it was built on deception, including self-deception. I thought I needed wealth and status to be valuable. Losing everything taught me that worth comes from within, not from possessions or positions." The vulnerability required for these discussions, standing before strangers and acknowledging her failures, was terrifying at first. Yet each time she shared her truth and received understanding rather than condemnation, another piece of her shame dissolved. The woman who had once gone to extraordinary lengths to hide her past now found healing in revealing it. Emma's willingness to share her journey began to resonate beyond her immediate circle. A local journalist, more thoughtful than those who had covered her scandal, wrote a nuanced piece about her volunteer work and personal transformation. The article focused not on sensationalism, but on redemption, presenting Emma's story as an example of resilience, rather than merely a cautionary tale. This more balanced coverage led to invitations to speak at community colleges and social service organizations. Emma approached these opportunities not as a return to public prominence, but as extensions of her commitment to service. She developed a presentation that addressed the complex factors that lead people to create false identities, not to excuse such choices, but to foster compassion for the desperation behind them. "We all wear masks to some degree," she would explain. "The danger comes when we lose sight of the face beneath the mask, when we begin to believe our own performance." Her story particularly resonated with single parents struggling to provide opportunities for their children, people rebuilding after personal or financial disasters, and those wrestling with the consequences of their own past deceptions. Audience members would approach her afterward, often in tears, to share their experiences of living divided lives or making compromises that had spiraled beyond their control. A woman who had hidden her criminal record to secure employment. A man who had pretended to have a degree to advance his career. Parents who maintained facades of perfect family life while struggling with addiction or abuse. In Emma's journey from deception through exposure to authentic rebuilding, these individuals found both warning and hope, a map for navigating their own complicated truths. The fulfillment Emma discovered in living authentically came not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual awakening. There were still difficult days, moments when she missed the ease of her former lifestyle or encountered reminders of what she had lost. Yet these challenges no longer defined her existence or threatened her sense of self. She found joy in achievements that would have seemed insignificant to Isabel, completing coursework toward a social work certification, helping a client secure stable housing, receiving a handwritten thank you note from someone she had mentored. These small victories carried deeper satisfaction than the social triumphs and acquisition of luxury goods that had once marked her success. The freedom from pretense allowed space for genuine growth. Emma could acknowledge mistakes without fear that they would expose her fundamental deception. She could ask questions without worrying that they would reveal gaps in her fabricated background. She could form opinions based on her actual experiences, rather than what would be expected of Isabel Munro. I spent so many years calculating every word and gesture. She confided to Williams during a rare conversation about her former life. I didn't realize how exhausting it was until I stopped. This authenticity extended to her relationship with Lily, which slowly evolved from cautious reconnection to something resembling mother and daughter. Their bond would never be uncomplicated. Too much had been lost during the years of separation. But it had become real in a way it never could have been while Emma lived as Isabel. They were building a relationship based on truth rather than convenience, on genuine care rather than obligation. The contrast between Emma's former wealth and her current circumstances provided daily lessons in what truly constituted richness in life. The mansion had offered space and luxury, but had ultimately become a gilded cage, its grandeur demanding constant maintenance of both the property and the persona required to inhabit it legitimately. Her studio apartment, though modest, was truly hers, a space where she could exist without performance or pretense. The designer clothes and jewelry that had once seemed essential markers of success now appeared as what they were. Beautiful objects, certainly, but not sources of genuine worth or happiness. The simple wardrobe that carried her through her current days required no special care or insurance, no anxiety about wearing the right label to the right event. Most striking was the difference in her social connections. The hundreds of friends who had populated Isabel's world had vanished almost instantly when scandal struck, revealing the transactional nature of those relationships. The handful of people who formed Emma's current community had come to know her at her lowest point and chosen to remain, their presence unconditional rather than contingent on what she could provide or represent. This new understanding of wealth extended beyond personal relationships to her broader perspective on society. Having lived at both extremes, struggling single mother, wealthy socialite, homeless woman, and now working professional, Emma possessed insights few others could claim. She recognized the arbitrary nature of many social barriers, the unacknowledged privileges that shaped opportunity, and the humanity that existed at every economic level. True wealth, she often reflected, isn't measured by what you have, but by who you are when everything is taken away. By this standard, Emma Reeves, once destitute, then falsely affluent, now authentically herself, had finally achieved a richness that no market fluctuation or public scandal could diminish. Isabel Munro no longer exists. In her place stands Emma Reeves, a woman who lost everything twice, and in doing so, finally found herself. Her journey from struggling single mother to wealthy socialite to homeless outcast, and finally to a person of authentic purpose, represents more than just a dramatic life story. It offers profound insights about the nature of identity, success, and redemption. Emma's path reminds us that honesty isn't simply a moral virtue, but a practical necessity for genuine connection and lasting fulfillment. The elaborate facade she constructed provided material comfort and social status, but it also isolated her from authentic relationships and created a constant state of anxiety. Only when she lost everything external could she begin the process of internal reconstruction, building a life based on truth rather than convenience. Her story also demonstrates extraordinary resilience, not the kind that allows someone to maintain a false front indefinitely, but the deeper strength required to face one's mistakes and begin again. When Emma hit rock bottom, sleeping in shelters and rejected by former friends, she discovered capacities within herself that had always existed but remained untapped during both her struggling years and her privileged ones. This resilience wasn't about returning to former glory, but about finding new purpose amid the ruins of her previous life. Perhaps most importantly, Emma's journey challenges our cultural definitions of value and success. In losing her mansion, her status, and her material wealth, she gained something far more precious: the freedom to live without pretense and the ability to form connections based on authentic sharing rather than strategic advantage. I hope Emma's story has resonated with you as deeply as it did with me. While few of us will experience such dramatic rises and falls, many of us struggle with questions of authenticity, the masks we wear in different contexts, and the price we pay for maintaining appearances that don't align with our true selves. If this narrative touched something in you, whether it made you reflect on your own life choices or simply moved you emotionally, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm particularly interested in hearing about moments when you've had to choose between authenticity and advantage, or times when losing something external helped you discover something valuable within yourself. For those who are new to the channel, this is what Twists of Love and Fate is all about: sharing stories that entertain while also challenging us to examine our lives more deeply. If you'd like more content like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. Next week, we'll explore another remarkable journey: the story of a man who discovered his entire family history was based on a century-old secret, and how this revelation transformed not just his understanding of himself, but his relationship with everyone around him. Before we part, I want to leave you with this thought: second chances rarely come in the form we expect. For Emma, true redemption wasn't about reclaiming her mansion or her social status. It came through embracing the very truth she had spent years hiding and using her experiences, both good and bad, to help others navigate their own complicated paths. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson of all: that our greatest failures, when faced with courage and honesty, can become the foundation for our most meaningful contributions to the world. Until next time, this is Twists of Love and Fate, reminding you that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning.